Welcome to today's one-of-a-kind RootsMagic webinar. My name is Michael Booth. I am Vice President of RootsMagic and one of its developers. And also with us this evening is the Roots Magician himself, Bruce Busby. And Bruce, of course, is the President of RootsMagic and its author. Now, dates are an essential part of recording your family history. And tonight, we'll learn about the many different ways you can enter dates, from ranges, partial dates, Quaker dates, and even British quarter dates, as well as how to use sort dates to arrange events just the way you want them. And with that introduction, I'll turn the time over to Bruce.
Hey, thanks for joining us. Okay, as Mike mentioned, what we're going to be talking about today are the many different ways that you can enter dates, and then how to work with sort dates. Now, a lot of times people, when they're entering a date for a particular fact or event, kind of put in the day, month, year, and that's about it. And they don't even realize how many different options there actually are for entering dates. So let's just jump right in. What I'm going to do is I'm actually, rather than do this, I'm going to create just a new blank person. I'm just going to call him John Doe. And John, that's a good male name, so we're just going to leave it at that. And I just want to basically do this rather than bringing up one of our existing people in our sample database, so that as I add these dates, you can kind of see the different options. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a fact, and let's just pick birth. And RootsMagic is going to ask me to enter a date. Now, like I say, normally you may think of a date as 2 January 1900. Okay, in other words, a day and a month and a year. And that's fine, but sometimes when you're entering a fact, we don't have all those parts. We may only have the month and the year. In that case, RootsMagic is fine with that. It goes ahead and lets you enter January of 1900. Sometimes we may only have the year, and RootsMagic's fine with that. You can enter just 1900. Sometimes we may just have the month, and RootsMagic's fine with that. I can put in just the month. Sometimes we may just have the day and the month, and so I can go ahead and do that. Okay, so you've got all these different options. Now, the only one we didn't actually talk about is what happens if I've got a day and a year, but maybe I can't read the month. Okay, so in other words, if I've got 2 January 1900, what happens if I actually couldn't read that month and I'm not sure it was January? Well, what RootsMagic will let you do is you can put in the question marks. Just put in 3 question marks in place of the month, and RootsMagic still knows how to handle this and how to sort this date relative to other dates. Okay, so in other words, if you do this, it's going to sort this date after the year only date. So in other words, if there's like an 1890 or a 1900, excuse me, it's going to sort it after that, but it will sort it before the January 1st, because it doesn't know what month, so it's going to assume it's just going to go ahead and put it in between 1900 and January 1st, 1900. That's where it will rearrange that. But that is a way to be able to, if you've got a missing piece right in the middle of a date, you can do that. So pretty much any combination of day, month, and year, you can go ahead and enter. Now, what happens if we enter something that's not legal? So in other words, if I enter a date that's not really a valid date, well, you'll notice if I come in here and create a date called JJJ, the background of that date field has turned yellow. Okay, right here, that date field, instead of the background being white, it's now yellow. What that means is that if I were to click Save, RootsMagic will accept that date that I entered. It'll accept whatever I typed in. It just doesn't know how to convert that to an actual date that it can use to sort in the right order with other dates. So if you see that background turn yellow, that means you may want to reevaluate that date and see if there's something wrong with it. And we're going to actually show you a couple of little examples of that later on later on in the webinar. Okay, so that's an overview of just entering dates. Now you can also enter BC dates. So if I had something that was 1900 BC, you'll see that the background is not yellow, which means it's fine with 1900 BC. It can figure that out, and it can sort that in the right order just as well as it can any of the other dates. Okay, now what I want to talk about, I'm going to kind of jump to another subject right now, but we're going to be coming back to this subject in a little bit. When I enter a date, so if I enter, let's go ahead and just enter the one we had before, 2 January 1900. When I tab away from that and move to the next field, watch right here where it says sort date. Okay, you'll notice it put the same date in there for me. It put 2 January 1900. Okay, if I were up here and I put in just January 1900 and moved away, it changes that to January 1900. What happens if I put that illegal date, that JJJ, and move away? You'll notice that it doesn't put a sort date. The reason for that is the sort date is the date that RootsMagic actually is going to use to rearrange and to order these facts that you enter for a person. Now, why is that? Okay, I might actually have a date that looks something like Easter 1921. Okay, now that may be what the actual source for this particular event said, that they were born on Easter 1921. Now, I could go into the date calendar in RootsMagic and try to find out when Easter was in 1921, or I could go into an almanac or whatever and find out that actual date and enter that there. But let's say I want to actually have it display born on Easter 1921 because that's what the source said. Well, if I want to do that, I can leave the date as this text and come down to the sort date, and although RootsMagic puts that sort date in there for me automatically for ones it can figure out, I can go change that. I can go change that date. So let's say that the date, and I'm just pulling this date out of my head, let's say it happened to have been April 2nd, 1921. Okay, what's going to happen is in sentences, RootsMagic was going to say John Doe was born Easter 1921, or on Easter 1921, or on Easter Sunday 1921, or whatever text I put in there, but it's going to use this sort date to determine what order this fact should sort relative to everything else. Okay, this is a very powerful concept. Hopefully it's fairly easy to understand, but these sort dates can actually be very powerful, much more powerful than just typing in a day, month, and year, and we'll show you that in a little bit as well. Okay, so that's what a sort date is. You have two dates for every fact. You have the date and you have the sort date. The date is what's going to display, and the sort date never is displayed, but it's what's used to determine what order to sort this fact in. Another place that sort date comes in handy is if you add a fact. Let me go ahead and cancel this fact right here. I'm going to cancel that out. I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a fact, and I'm going to add one called, let me think what's a good one here. Description. No, description has a date as well. No, I can't find one. But you can see over on the right there, it tells me whether a fact, oh, there's one right there. Reference number, that's a good one. Okay, if I was going to enter a reference number, I could come in and put that reference number, 123-45. Now, if I wanted that reference number to always be the first thing that's printed, possibly even before the birth, I can just enter a sort date that's before the birth date, and even though this particular fact does not have a date or a date field, I can use that sort date to determine where it should fit. So you're not forced to always have fact types without dates be at the end. You can force them to be at the beginning. You can force them to be in the middle. So you can use that sort date whether the fact type has a date field or not. So like I say, very powerful type of feature there. Okay, so now let's talk about a couple of other date features. Okay, so what we've basically shown so far is that you can enter any combination of day, month, and year, and then you can use the sort date to determine how that sorts. So let's talk about a few other types of dates. Let's go ahead and talk about what's called a double date. Okay, after the Gregorian calendar replaced the Julian calendar, dates were all screwed up. Okay, in other words, there were places where dates kind of didn't exist and other places where two dates existed at the same time. Anyways, double dates were used to kind of take care of that. And this particular webinar is not, we don't have the time to go in and completely just tell you exactly what double dates are. We're going to just show you how you can enter those. But with a double date, if you go look on Wikipedia or do a Google search on double dates, you'll find out what that is. Okay, but let's go ahead. If I happen to enter, let's say I enter a date like well, let's go ahead and enter 15 February 1675/6. Okay, now you'll notice that when you enter a double date, RootsMagic puts the correct sort date. It knows exactly how to handle the sort date. It knows which of those years it's supposed to sort on and everything, but it takes care of that. Okay, so basically dates between January 1st and March 24th were written as this so that you could to try to kind of clear up the confusion that would happen. Okay, now if you enter a double date that's before double dates actually needed to be used, so let's go ahead and put 1580/1. Okay, you'll notice that even though that looks like a valid double date, it's going to put the yellow background because it's not recognizing that as a real double date because it's not. Okay, so like I say, we don't have like a time. We could spend hours trying to discuss and debate double dates, the Gregorian versus the Julian calendar, and so on. Just be aware that double dating is provided. You put in year / the next year. Okay, the next type of date that we want to show you that RootsMagic has support for is what's called a Quaker date. Okay, and so if I wanted to enter a Quaker date, I could come in and I could put something like 12-day, 5-month, 1588. You see when I tab away, okay, that's the way RootsMagic is going to display that. You'll notice that the background is white. It's not yellow. So RootsMagic not only understands the Quaker dates as you enter them, but it also understands, hey, this is a Quaker date, so we're going to have to display that. We're going to have to be able to display it as a Quaker date. Now, Quaker dates also take advantage of the double dating, so that double dating stuff that we showed you, that works here as well. Now, one thing you'll notice right here, I put in 12-day, put in 5-month, but you'll notice the sort date came out as July 12th. Okay, that's because the Quaker dates before 1752 were based on that Julian calendar. We talked about the double dating. Okay, those dates before 1752 were based on that Julian calendar. So the first month is actually March. Okay, so that's why the 5th month before 1588 is going to show up as July. Okay, so that's why you're going to get that. Okay, so RootsMagic is going to be able to handle double dates and Quaker dates. And now let's talk about British quarter dates. Okay, so if you're basically and see, I don't have my little notes on here, but I'm pretty sure I can do, quarter one, 1780. Okay, and if I put quarter one 1780, it's going to display it as the March quarter. So you would have the March quarter, you would have the, if I did quarter two, okay, there's your June quarter, and so on. So again, like with the Quaker dates, when you enter a British quarter date, RootsMagic not only knows what that date is, but it also knows how to display it as a quarter date. It doesn't just automatically take a quarter date that you enter and try to cram it in and create some, Gregorian, day, month, year type date. It tries to preserve the date format as you entered it. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is going to be modifiers. Okay, let's go ahead and enter a regular old date, 1 January 1900. Okay, there's a bunch of different types of modifiers, and these modifiers can be applied to any date regardless of whether it has a day, month, or year, or any combination of those. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of go through the different dates so that you can kind of get a feel for the flexibility of this. And again, each one of these dates that I enter, you'll notice as that background stays white, that means RootsMagic can understand what that date is so that it knows how to sort it with other dates, whether those other dates are for this person's facts or when it's combining facts with other people, like in the timeline view. Okay, first thing, before. I can say before a date. And you'll notice as I type in, I can abbreviate a lot of these. I don't have to necessarily type the whole thing in. But if I say before January, John Doe was born before January 1st, 1900. Okay, so before, that means this event happened before that date. Pretty straightforward. By, okay, means something happened by that date. Okay, he was born by January 1st. It means by the time that date came, he was born. To, okay, he was born to. Now, normally I don't use to by itself, but RootsMagic will let you do that. I usually use it with a range, and we're going to talk about ranges in a little bit. And ranges let you say this happened from this date to this date, and so this is allowed, as is from. So I can use from this date, or I can use to this date, or I can use from this date to this date. Okay, until. Okay, until is another modifier that you're allowed to use. Okay, another modifier you're allowed to use, since. Okay, this happened since this date. Okay, and then finally, after this date. Okay, so these are modifiers that actually work against one date, a single date. Okay, before, after, by, to, until, and so on. These all apply to a single date. Now, I can actually use two dates in a single date field. Okay, so I could actually say from January 1st, 1900 to December 31st, 1900. Okay, and as I tab away, you'll see it cleans it up. And you'll also notice that as I'm moving from these, the sort date is letting me include that as well. So you can see that sort date does not have to be just a day, month, and year. That sort date can basically be as flexible as the actual date field itself. Okay, and so RootsMagic knows how to handle overlapping ranges within dates and things like that. Okay, from to, this is one, and there's also another one between this date and this date. Okay, these are two different things. Okay, there's from date 1 to date 2, and there's between date 1 and date 2. From means that basically it happened this entire range. From is really useful for occupation facts or residence. he was a teacher from this date to this date. Between is more for uncertainty, which means he was born between this date and this date. Okay, it doesn't mean he was born every single one of those days in a continuous thing. It just means he was born between those dates and you're not exactly sure what. You might have one source that says this date and another source that says that date, and you could enter two different birth events, or you could enter the one birth event and say he was born between this date and this date, and then put the sources, the various sources on that one fact. Okay. The other place, and this is used for conflicting, and that is or. Date 1 or date 2. Okay. And what this means is that it happened either on date 1 or date 2. So if you got conflicting information, or lets you do that as well. Okay, so those are modifiers that work with date date ranges. Okay, in other words, a range of dates. Okay, now we have other modifiers, what you might call qualifiers. We showed you the ones before, after. Okay, those basically are take the date and kind of like when relative to that date. It was before this date, it was after this date, it was between these dates, it was by this date, it was until this date. Okay, but RootsMagic also has what are called qualifiers. Okay, those others we called modifier, directional modifiers, whatever you want to call them. Basically, they had to do with when it was relative to a date. Okay, qualifiers let you basically be a little bit less than specific about a date. So this is where I can say about January 1st, 1900. Okay, John Doe was born about. That means, yeah, it was somewhere around that time. Okay, you can also use estimate or estimated. Okay, and again, like I say, you can abbreviate these. Estimated, I'm estimating this date. Okay, there's several different types of estimate of things, and you can use any of them. You can use estimated. You can use circa. Okay, if you wanna get into the non-English words, you can use was born circa. And RootsMagic knows the difference between estimated and circa. And one you'll see a lot, especially in genealogical publishing, is say. Okay, John Doe was born, say, January 1st, 1900. Okay, again, that's another estimated date. So you have about, which means it was near this date. You have estimate, circa, and say, which means we estimated this date. There's a third category called calculated. Okay, and this calculated doesn't necessarily mean estimated, although it is an estimate, but it basically calculated means, yes, it's an estimate, but I calculated it from something else. Maybe I had a tombstone that said John Doe died on this date at the age of this many years, this many months, and this many days. Well, you can use the date calculator, which we'll show you in a little bit. You can use that date calculator to calculate a birth date. Okay, when you do that, don't put that date as a fact. Okay, and when people created these tombstones, the person that gave them the information could have calculated it wrong. So that's where it's important to say calculated. In other words, this date is not one I've actually found someplace, but I calculated it based on something on a tombstone or in a record. I calculated it, and then make sure to include the source saying where you calculated it. Okay, let's move on to another category. Okay, these are kind of a combination of the before, until, after, and the about, estimated, whatever. And these, again, you can use them however you want. You can say was born certainly. Okay, and you'll see as I type it in, again, I'm just going to abbreviate down here, but when RootsMagic prints the sentence, it spells it all out. Certainly, in other words, I'm positive about that date. If you're going to use that, make sure you have some really good sources so that people don't crack on you for saying it certainly without any good documentation. Okay, you also have probably. He was born probably. You'll see this a lot in genealogy, probably. You'll also have another one which is very similar, possibly. Okay, possibly means there's some evidence that supports it, but you know, it might be something else. Okay, likely. Okay, in other words, that the odds are, you know, slightly in favor of this being the date. Okay, you also have apparently. Okay, in other words, yeah, it appears that he was born on that date, but that's the limit right there. And then finally, perhaps. He was born perhaps. In other words, yeah, this could be the right date. You know, it's possible, but you know, I haven't really done a lot of research on it and so on. And then finally, maybe. Okay, it was maybe. In other words, I'm just pulling this number out of this date out of a hat, but you know, I really don't have anything to support that. Okay, so as you can see, there are a lot of different types of modifiers that you can use, and a large number of these modifiers for the date can also be used in the sort date. So in the sort date, you can use between this date and this date, from this date to that date, this date or that date, before, by, to this date, until this date, just the date itself, from this date, since this date, and after this date. Okay, so you can basically do that. Now, what I want to show you here, I want to show you something having to do with the sort dates. Okay, let's say that actually, I'm just going to go ahead and save this one here. I'm going to add a fact, and this is something you'll occasionally see. I'm going to enter the fact, and I'm going to put the death. Let's actually delete this one here. Okay, on the death, let's say the person died in 1900, and that's all I really know. And let's say they were buried in 1900. Okay. Now, unless this person had enemies, they probably were not buried before they died. Okay, if they had an enemy, maybe they were buried alive, who knows. But usually a person is going to die before they're buried. Well, if you put or happen to have the exact same date here, what you can do, the sort date for both is going to be 1900. What you can do is you can use a trick to get these to sort in the proper order. And what I can do is I can go to the death and I can put 1900-1, in other words, the first one, and then I can put 1900-2, that's the second one that I want in the second order. And by doing that, for the sort date, doing -1, -2, -3, and so on, I can get these facts for a person that all happen to happen on the same day to sort in the proper order. Okay, so that's the way that you can use the sort date to actually get facts to sort in the proper order, even though they happen to be the exact same date. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to hop out of here. I want to show you a report. There's a report in RootsMagic. You go into the reports, bring up the reports, and you go into the list. And there's a list type called the fact list. And the fact list is about 8 different reports in one. When I go to create that, I can create a list of people that have a particular fact type and so on. But there's there's a report type in here called facts with text dates. Now, what that means is anytime I have a date that turns that background yellow on the edit screen, that's considered a text date. And what that means is RootsMagic stores whatever you typed in just as the text you typed in. So it will display the date exactly as you entered it, but since it's just text, RootsMagic doesn't have any idea how to sort that. It doesn't know it came before this or it came after that, or or so on. So what this is going to do is give me a list of all the events or facts in my database with a date that RootsMagic can't figure out whether it's a valid date or not. And so let's go ahead and generate the report, and you'll see an example of some of these. Okay, these two, the word infant was typed into the date field. Okay, that basically is going to, you may want that. You may want that date field to have just some plain text, and that's fine, but this is going to show you that. It's also going to show you dates that are just flat out illegal. Okay, so for example, February 29th of 1900 is an illegal date. Okay, now February 29th of 1904 would be a valid date, but leap years are every 4 years unless that year is divisible by 100. Okay, so February 29th, there was no February 29th in 1900. 1900 was not a leap year because even though it was divisible by 4, it was also divisible by 100, which meant it wasn't a leap year. Now there's another thing beyond that, that if the year is divisible by 400, then it actually is a leap year. That's why the year 2000 was a leap year. Okay, even though it was divisible by 100. So there's all these rules, of course, as to what is a leap year and what's not. So RootsMagic knows those rules, so it can come up here and can say, that's not a valid date. Even though it looks like a perfectly fine date, it's not. And in fact, if I were to go to Phoebe Sophia Davis and I look at it, and we will go look at that, you'll be able to see that that date is going to have a yellow background. So it can warn you as you're entering it that there's something wrong with that date. Okay, this date doesn't look like there's a problem with it. April 9th of 1936. Okay, I'm going to show you how this can actually, how this text fact with text dates can actually help you with another possible problem. So let's go ahead and go to Phoebe, and there's that fact right there. February 29th, 1900, and you can see it's got that background. If I change that to 1901, still 2, 3, 4. As soon as I change that to 1904, that is a valid leap year, so it's legal. So if you come across a source that says they were born February 29th of 1900 and you type that in there, you know that source is not right because that's not a valid date. Okay, you could still go ahead and enter it and document it as that, and then come down here in the sort date. You could put, February 28th of 1900 or March 1st of 1900, whichever, to get it to sort in the right place if you want to go ahead and keep that. And then you could enter the source that says, this source says that's the date, even though I know that's not a legal date. Okay, let's go ahead and look at this other one though, and you're not going to be able to really tell. See right here, this is the date it said was wrong. No, I guess it was the burial. Yeah, it's the burial. Okay. Now, if you look at that date, it shows that it's illegal. And so what you could do, theoretically, is you could start just deleting and changing individual things to see. So if I change that 9 to 8, nope, that's still illegal. Okay. April, I don't have a problem with that. Let's go ahead and change that to a 1. Okay, and that's legal. Okay. The reason that this was wrong, and those of you who are older are going to know what this is all about. If you remember on typewriters, they'd never had the number 1 key. Okay, they had number 2 through 9, but if you wanted to enter a 1, you used what? A lowercase l. If you wanted an O or a 0, you used the letter O. Okay, so if you have somebody that's in that kind of a habit of entering the number 1 as a lowercase l, RootsMagic is going to be able to figure that out. Typewriters, all you had to care about is if they look the same, but on this, RootsMagic actually cares whether it's a 1 or an L. So it's going to, as you enter something that's even a little bit illegal or that RootsMagic can't figure it out, RootsMagic will turn the background of that date field yellow so that to indicate to you, hey, you need to take a look at this date because there's something about it that we can't figure it out as a date. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this, and I'm going to come up into the tools, and we're going to show you a few of the date tools. First, we have a date calculator, okay? And the date calculator, this is the one I told you about. So if you happen to come across a tombstone that said this person died on March 4th of 1870 at the age of 72 years, 5 months, and 6 days, I can go ahead and enter that, and you'll notice that when I fill in any two of these fields, the third field has a little calculator beside it that's enabled, and I just click that, and it's going to show me, okay, well, assuming this person died on this date at that age, the start date or their theoretical birth date would be September 26th of 1797. Again, like I said, don't just automatically assume that that date's correct. When you enter that, if this is how you come up with that birth date for the person, make sure you enter it as calculated September 26th, 1797. Don't just enter it as the as the date, saying that it's specifically that this is true. Okay. Next thing I want to show you is the calendar, and you can get to that also from tools to calendar. And what this is this is basically a perpetual calendar. So if I wanted to go find out, let's say somebody said, or a document said this person died on the second Thursday in April of 1921, I can just go 1921, and I'm going to go to April, and the second Thursday in April. Okay, there we go, April 14th of 1921. So when you get those types of records where they basically say things like that, you can use this perpetual calendar to go back in time and find out what the date is or what day of the week something happened. If somebody said, oh, they were born on Mother's Day in such and such year, you can go back and you can find which days of the week fell on a Sunday, so you can narrow down your possibilities for that particular date. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some questions here. Let's see, I have a date of birth listed as August 24th, 1843/4th, and says it's an illegal date. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Well, actually, where's my Doe? Let's go use my guy here. Okay, so we had a date. He's got a date of 24 August 1843. Let's see, /4. Okay, and it says that's illegal. Okay, most likely by the time 1843 rolled around, I'm guessing that all the countries had already adopted the Gregorian calendar. I'm not completely sure on that, but that would be my guess. Or because it's in August. Yeah, the double dating doesn't apply in those later months. The double dating only applies to those dates like at the beginning of the year, which you didn't know which one it fell into. So it's going to only be the dates between January 1st and March 24th. So that's why. So if I change this to February, then that's legal. Okay, so it's basically the only dates that really need to be double dated are those dates between January 1st and March 24th, which actually where you specifically need to know which year it's in. In August, there's no confusion as to which year it's in. So So that's why we have that. Okay, let's see, other questions. Okay, what about times? I'm thinking of birth times for twins. Yeah, the dates do not have the ability to store the time in them. That would actually make the date's storage quite a bit larger. And so currently there's not times. So if you wanted to keep track of, which twin was born first, what I would do is on their birth dates, enter the sort date for one of them. The first one is -1, and the sort date for the second one as -2. Okay, that's really not going to affect how the birth sorts within that individual person's events. But when you show, like on a timeline where it takes both of their dates into account, it will use that sort date and will cause the first twin to show up first before the second twin. That's a really good question. Okay, on the fact list, it would be great if you could click on the name in the fact report and go to the actual record. That's true. That also would require completely rewriting the entire report engine, which is something we're looking at doing. So yeah, good comment. That's probably not something that we could. That's not something we could, spend a few hours and make it do that, because right now that the reports are just that, they're reports. They're not live reports. Okay, does the sort date force the sequence of events in a like a family history book in the narrative report? And the answer is yes, it does. It does force the sequence of events in the narrative report. Pretty much any place that you have facts, it is what it is. The sort date is what determines how those are sorted. Okay, let's see. Does RootsMagic account for a Jewish calendar? We don't specifically have the Jewish calendar stuff in there. That's something we could actually look at, see what we can look and see what's involved in supporting that. I personally don't know how complicated that might or might not be. So that's something we'll add it to our list of things to look into to see what would be involved in supporting that. Okay. It says, oh, yeah, this is a good question. The British and Canadians and pretty much many other countries would use 2/6/1950 to mean June 2nd. Okay, so basically, let's go ahead and show you this. We'll actually use her example. If I type 2/6/1950, okay, in the United States, only country in the world that I know of that puts the month first, that's going to come out as February 6th. And you can see that's what it shows up as, February 6th. RootsMagic knows the difference if it's not ambiguous. So if I were to put 14/2/1950, RootsMagic's not going to try to turn that into, some month 14 the second day. It knows that it's the 14th day of February. So if it's not ambiguous, in other words, if one of those numbers is greater than 12, then it knows how to handle that. If you want it to always treat, for example, if I always wanted it to treat 2/6/1950, if I always wanted it to treat this as June 2nd rather than February 6th, what I can do is I can go up into my options, I can go to Tools, and I can go down here to File. I think it's in File Options. It may be in Program Options. Nope, it is in Program Options. Tools, Program Options. When I go into Tool, Program Options, all right, where is it? Oh, right here. How to interpret ambiguous dates. Now, by default, RootsMagic is going to try to be smart. It's going to try to say, if your Windows settings say that the day comes first, then do that. Okay. Now, if it doesn't, If it doesn't do that, you can hard code it. So you can say, 5/10 can either mean May 10th, which is like in the US, or 5/10 means October 5th. So if I were to choose that option, okay, that would allow me to go in here and enter that same date, that 2/6/1950, and when I tab away, instead of being February 6th, this will be June 2nd. So you can choose to hard code that, but like I say, by default, your Windows settings should be telling RootsMagic how to actually handle that. Although if your settings are set to to US, then it's going to do that even if you happen to be just visiting the US or whatever, it's going to use that. So you have your option. Either use it the way Windows says to do it, which is the default, or go in there and hardwire it to the way you specifically want it to be. Okay, how does the sort date handle unknown? And you can see right there, if you type in the word unknown, that's not a valid date. I could go ahead and put in the 3 question marks, in which case you can see, well, it didn't accept that, it wants something else. If you put in a date, if you put in the word unknown, RootsMagic will display it as that, but it's not going to put the sort date in at all. So, but I could still come in here and put the sort date. I could come in here and put 1901 if I wanted it to sort after that. And so even though it displays as unknown, it sorts however I tell the sort date. See, that's the thing about the sort date, is although RootsMagic tries to fill that sort date in, if you enter a legal date, RootsMagic will fill in that sort date. But if you enter a text date or a date that RootsMagic just cannot figure out what the sort date should be, you can come down here and edit it. You can edit that sort date anytime you want. So you could actually come in here. Let's say you enter a date. Let's say you put January 1900. Well, you'll see right here the sort date is January 1900. Well, let's say you don't like the way RootsMagic happens to be sorting that. I could come in here and change that to January 1st. If I want, in other words, if I want this to sort at the beginning of all the January 1900s, or if I want it to sort at the end of all the January 1900s, or if I want it to sort somewhere in the middle of all the January 1900s. So the sort date is completely editable, just like the regular date is. We just try to pre-fill it in automatically for you, just so you don't have to keep typing it in every time. The only time you should ever really need to type in a sort date is if you enter a date that RootsMagic can't understand, or if you have several facts that are all on the exact same date and you want them to sort in a particular order. Okay, if I'm using my US database in England, will all my dates change automatically? And the answer to that is no. What I showed you there about the 2/6/1950, that's only on the data entry. Okay, in other words, only when I type 2/6/1950, it's how does RootsMagic interpret that as I enter it. Once it's entered in as either February 6th or June 2nd, RootsMagic remembers that it's February 6th or June 2nd. It does not change it at all. Now, there are ways that you can display how or change how it's displayed, but what you'll do is you can go up into the Tools menu and go down here, and this is in the File options. You can choose the date format. Now, you'll notice the date formats that RootsMagic lets you display, none of them are number/number/number or number-number-number. RootsMagic does not let you display dates in an ambiguous format. Okay, in other words, as you're entering them, they might be ambiguous, but once RootsMagic has a date entered, it's not going to display it back out in in an ambiguous format. So you're going to get the month either 3 letters or spelled out or whatever. Okay, problem of using after January 18th, 1900 gives an age at death which is erroneous based on that. I'd have to look at that and see what that is. It's basically if you're putting after or about, if you're using modifiers, it probably makes sense to not use the age modifier for in your sentence templates. If you have questions about that, just check out the last webinar we did on sentence templates. We talk about that age. You can go into that and remove that. You know, so when you use a modifier, all RootsMagic can do is try its best to figure out what that actual age would be based on the modifier that you have. So, well, it looks like I don't see any other questions in here. Let me look one last pass through here. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions. And if I did miss one, I'm sorry. There's a lot of questions in here, but it looks like we've gotten them all. So I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. I hope you have been able to see how many options there are. If you want, what you can do is go into the help and go into help contents to bring up that help screen. Okay, once you're on the help screen, you can either go to the search or to the index and just type in date. You got your dates right there. Just go ahead and double click on that. Formats, that's the one you want right there. And this right here is going to give you all that information. How you can enter partial dates, BC, information about double dates, Quaker dates, your modifiers, your range modifiers, your estimates and calculateds, your qualitative modifiers, sort dates, how to sort dates on the same event. So a lot of that information is already in there in the help, so you can just bring that up, and if you want to print it, you can print that so you've got access to that all the time. Again, hope you've enjoyed this, and keep watching. We're going to be posting some new webinars in the near future. And thanks for joining us.